The threat to the U.S. auto industry is coming from Canada, not China or Europe. That's correct. Our largest trading partner recently took a step that could send thousands of jobs abroad and drive up the cost of American auto production. But it goes beyond tariffs. The entire auto industry is in jeopardy as Ford and General Motors are caught in the crossfire. Billions of dollars in auto trade are at risk as a result of what began as a tariff dispute that has now escalated into a full-scale economic standoff. There may be a serious crisis for Tesla and the entire EV sector. There may soon be factory closures and widespread layoffs. In today's video, we examine Canada's strategic targeting of the U.S. auto industry, the devastating effects on Tesla, and the reasons behind this trade. War might result in factory closures, job losses, and the political struggle that underlies the financial meltdown. With automakers scrambling to keep prices high and political tensions at an all-time high, Trump tariffs, and the 2024 election. There has never been greater uncertainty about the future of the North American auto industry. Do you believe that the U.S. will lose this trade war? Or is Canada taking a strong stance? The ongoing trade disputes between the U.S. and Canada are nothing new, but this time they're unique. Instead of responding hastily, Canada has launched a strategic counterattack that could tip the scales in North American trade, turning what began as a simple tariff decision by the United States into a full-scale economic standoff. Canada has responded to the United States' 25% tariff on important Canadian exports with a targeted and strategic strategy, deciding to strike the U.S. where it hurts the most. Canada has imposed its own set of retaliatory tariffs, but instead of imposing broad, indiscriminate tariffs, it has targeted economically and politically sensitive industries, with major corporations and industries that affect important voter bases among the hardest-hit sectors: bourbon exports from Kentucky, American agriculture, and most significantly, the auto industry, were all severely damaged when Canada decided to impose high tariffs on electric vehicles and essential auto parts. With billions of dollars worth of automotive trade between the two nations annually, this decision sent shockwaves through the industry, affecting not only automakers, but also the intricate network of suppliers, dealers, and employees who rely on a seamless, tariff-free trade system. This is a strategic message that goes beyond economics. What began as a trade war may now be evolving into a struggle for political leverage, as Canada is demonstrating that it will not be intimidated and that it has the ability to make trade restrictions harm the U.S. just as much, if not more. The biggest blow is on the horizon for one of America's most significant automakers. The question is, how much harm will this do to the American economy before Washington acts? And Canada doesn't stop there. The crisis facing Tesla and the ETV sector, long regarded as the epitome of American innovation, Tesla is now caught in the crossfire of this trade war, with potentially disastrous results. The company's reliance on essential Canadian raw materials, nickel, lithium, and aluminum, all essential parts of electric vehicle batteries, is the foundation of Tesla's production success. But Canada is currently enforcing stringent tariffs and restrictions on these exports. With supply costs soaring, Tesla's supply chain could potentially come to a complete stop, with dire immediate repercussions. Tesla's growth and profitability will be negatively impacted if it is forced to increase car prices or reduce production. Investors have already noticed. As concerns about a supply crisis grow, Tesla's stock has experienced significant swings. But this is not limited to Tesla. The complete electric car. The American auto industry is currently feeling the effects of other automakers, such as Ford. For the production of their EV models, General Motors and Rivian also rely on Canadian resources. Ironically, the Biden administration has been aggressively pushing for a shift to electric vehicles as part of its climate goals. But this trade war could derail the entire EV industry before it even reaches mass adoption. This is because rising raw material prices will make it more difficult for consumers to afford electric vehicles. If the EV crisis wasn't bad enough, things are about to get worse for automakers everywhere. The entire North American auto supply chain is dismantling the auto industry's breaking point. And the more expensive EVs get, the less likely the average consumer is to switch. reversing years of progress. One of the world's most interconnected supply chains is the North American auto industry. Parts for a single vehicle may come from all over the U.S. Canada. For decades, manufacturers have relied on a predictable tariff-free flow of materials between the United States and Canada. With aluminum, steel, computer chips, batteries, and even glass, all essential components of modern vehicles, being shipped between factories in both countries dozens of times before a car rolls off the production line. However, with these new tariffs, that seamless supply chain is starting to crack, and automakers are rushing to respond. Automakers are being compelled to make difficult choices. Some businesses have already reduced their output. Potential layoffs at Ford plants that mainly use Canadian parts have been announced. Bottlenecks in the supply chain have caused General Motors to reduce output at certain facilities. The largest factory of fear closures, job losses, and the pricing problem, every additional expense in the supply chain is eventually passed on to customers, could result in the largest price increases in the history of the auto industry, making it impossible for millions of Americans to afford a new car that is already pricey due to inflation and chip shortages. The greatest irony: the trade war is accomplishing the exact opposite of what it was intended to do. And as economic conditions worsen, political pressure is intensifying. These tariffs were first imposed to protect American manufacturing jobs, but instead of increasing domestic production, they are forcing factories to close, resulting in layoffs and economic uncertainty. The trade war is now turning into a significant political issue that may influence the next election. The political ramifications of this trade war are not limited to economics. It has evolved into a political weapon that is influencing elections, dividing leaders, and determining the course of North American relations going forward. President Donald Trump has been an outspoken advocate of protectionist trade policies, claiming that tariffs will compel businesses to return to American manufacturing. However, his approach has had unforeseen consequences, particularly in crucial swing states, where, as the 2024 election draws near, factories are now firing employees rather than hiring them. While Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has framed this trade war as a battle for Canada's sovereignty and positioned Canada's retaliatory measures as a necessary defense against economic bullying, Trump's trade policies are coming under scrutiny, and his supporters in manufacturing-heavy states are beginning to wonder whether these tariffs are actually helping American workers. The question is how long this political impasse can continue before it degenerates into a full-scale economic crisis with factory jobs at stake. Many Canadians now view the national support for the tariffs as a moment of pride in their country, an opportunity to confront the United States and demonstrate that Canada will not be taken advantage of. Both leaders are under pressure to find a solution to this intensifying trade war. But with elections approaching on both sides of the border, neither wants to be perceived as giving in. If this trade war continues, the economic repercussions could extend well beyond the auto industry, impacting other sectors that no one anticipated, with energy serving as Canada's ultimate leverage. If you think the U.S.-Canada trade war is terrible, just think of what would happen if Canada chose to turn its energy exports into weapons. Although Canada has not yet used this card, the prospect of it doing so would be enough to send shivers through Washington at this very moment. The United States depends largely on Canadian oil, natural gas, and electricity to power its economy. Canada is the United States' largest foreign supplier of crude oil, making up almost half of all oil imports. As a result, if Canada were to reduce exports or raise prices, the effects would be immediate, and the price of petrol would skyrocket overnight, causing an inflation spike that could affect both American businesses and consumers. In addition to oil, Canada is a significant supplier of electricity to the northern United States. Cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit depend on Canadian hydroelectric power to maintain their grids. So if Canada were to restrict its exports, rolling blackouts and power shortages might become a reality, forcing the U.S. to look for other sources. Although Canadian officials have not yet taken significant action, the threat of such a move gives Canada significant leverage in trade negotiations. If the U.S. keeps promoting unfair trade practices, the message is clear. Although energy is only one aspect of the problem, Canada has the ability to retaliate in ways that could upend entire industries and affect millions of lives. The trade's effects on the world economy war is already beginning to develop. Worldwide repercussions. What began as a bilateral dispute is now having an impact on the world economy, and other nations are keeping an eye on this trade. One of the largest winners in this scenario is the war, and many of them are responding by changing their own trade policies. As tensions between the U.S. and Canada increase, China. If China is successful in securing long-term agreements with Canadian suppliers, it will enter into stronger trade relations with Canada and offer lucrative deals on energy, raw materials, and auto parts. While European countries are looking to change their trade alliances due to North American economic uncertainty, the United States could permanently lose access to vital resources, which would weaken American industries for years to come. Germany is growing. The United Kingdom and France are searching for more reliable trading partners and re-evaluating their supply chains. If this pattern persists, American businesses may lose out on billions of dollars in international trade opportunities due to a conflict that could have been prevented. Then there is the problem of South American developing nations. Due to disrupted North American trade, Africa and Southeast Asia are seeing new opportunities to fill the voids, which means that American businesses. The longer this trade war drags on, the more the United States risks losing its influence on the international scene. Trade is about more than just money. It's about trust relationships and long-term partnerships. At the moment, many nations are doubting whether the United States is still a reliable trade partner. And while global markets are feeling the effects, regular consumers will bear the brunt of the financial toll, which is already affecting households across America. Politicians in Washington trade face declining salaries and growing expenses. Inflation has already been a significant worry for millions of families, and this trade war is making matters worse. Wars are a matter of policy and strategy, but for regular Americans, they are a matter of survival. One of the largest price increases is for cars, as the cost of producing cars rises due to supply chain disruptions, and consumers are being hit with record-breaking sticker prices. Purchasing a new car is already out of reach for many Americans, and now even the used car market is becoming unaffordable as demand outpaces supply. The cost of everyday goods, such as groceries, petrol, and household essentials, is rising as businesses struggle to absorb the additional cost of tariffs. Supply. But the issue persists because tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum raise appliance costs. In addition to the job market, the rising cost of electronics and building materials means that if you want to upgrade your smartphone, remodel your house, or purchase a new refrigerator, you should budget much more in the upcoming months. The trade war is not just about Canada and the United States. It is part of a much larger global shift. However, while the decline of manufacturing is concerning, there is another major shift taking place. The trade war is not just a short-term political dispute. It is part of a larger global shift. The very tariffs that were meant to protect American jobs are now forcing businesses to lay off workers. Companies that rely on Canadian materials are cutting costs wherever possible, leading to factory closures, pay cuts, and widespread job uncertainty. As a result, thousands of American workers are now facing unemployment, and for those who remain employed, their paychecks are not stretching as far as they used to. The The more the U.S. isolates itself through trade restrictions and tariffs, the more room there is for other countries to gain influence. But the auto sector is only one piece of the puzzle. Will the United States leaders find a way to re-establish equilibrium and trust with its trading partners? Or will the country continue on its current course of economic isolation? While the trade war between the United States and Canada has dominated headlines, the next few months could decide America's economic future for decades to come. The crackdowns on immigration and the farming crisis will have a lasting impact. There is an impending crisis that could completely destroy the U.S. agriculture sector. President Donald Trump's stringent immigration policies it is practically impossible to maintain food production at the levels needed to feed the country for decades due to farms all over the country. In order to plant, grow, and harvest crops, American farms have depended on migrant labor. Many of these workers are from Mexico and Central America, and they perform the arduous tasks that few Americans would be willing to perform without them. Food prices would drop, and entire farming operations would fail. Trump's proposed mass deportations and strict immigration restrictions have caused the market to soar. Millions of agricultural jobs could be lost if these policies take effect, leaving crops to rot in the fields and driving food prices to all-time highs. The impact would go well beyond farming communities, as supermarkets, eateries, and food distributors would all face shortages that would eventually affect consumers nationwide. This is not just conjecture in states like Georgia and Alabama. Farmers were forced to leave their crops unharvested and incur losses of millions of dollars due to immediate labor shortages caused by earlier attempts at harsh immigration crackdowns. The farming industry is not the only sector at risk, but it is evident that American farms cannot operate without a stable workforce. The entire economy will be impacted by the labor shortages brought on by restrictive immigration laws, which will also affect the construction, manufacturing, and service sectors. The manufacturing crisis and labor shortages. For many years, American manufacturing, from the steel mills of Pennsylvania to the booming factories of Detroit, was the foundation of the economy, offering millions of steady, well-paying jobs. Manufacturing jobs have steadily disappeared offshore to nations with cheaper labor, or been replaced by automation over the past 40 years, despite the fact that the industry was once a symbol of national strength. Today, the crisis is worsening, and the U.S. is at a breaking point. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, and auto parts have increased production costs, forcing businesses to slow down operations, lay off employees, and in some cases, shut down completely. Rather than protecting American jobs, these tariffs are forcing manufacturers to look for cheaper suppliers overseas, undermining the very industries they were intended to support. The ongoing trade war with Canada has only made matters worse. A serious lack of workers is making the situation worse. Across the nation, manufacturing and construction companies are having difficulty finding skilled workers, particularly as older generations retire and fewer young Americans pursue careers in these fields. Stricter immigration laws have also resulted in a shortage of immigrant workers who have long played critical roles in these industries, leaving factories with decreasing output, construction projects at a standstill, and businesses being forced to either pay skyrocketing wages or relocate jobs elsewhere. The effects of this crisis go far beyond factories and construction sites. When manufacturing declines, the entire supply chain suffers. Small businesses that rely on factory orders see their revenue dry up. Communities based on industrial jobs face economic collapse, and transportation companies lose jobs. Cities like Youngstown, Ohio, and Flint, Michigan, serve as stark reminders of what happens when an industry disappears and its factories are abandoned. If the U.S. does not act quickly to stabilize trade relations, invest in workforce training, and reform immigration laws, The crisis of rising unemployment and a faltering middle class will only worsen the manufacturing and construction sectors, which are crucial to economic stability and cannot exist without them. Despite the fact that the United States of America is in danger of falling even further behind with regard to global competition, the problems do not end there. Continuous inflation and rising interest rates are putting even more pressure on businesses and consumers alike, which is making the economic struggles that are caused by labor shortages even worse. These factors are making the situation even more difficult for everyone involved. Interest rates, inflation, and economic instability are all factors. Despite the absence of trade wars and labor shortages, the economy of the United States is already struggling with inflation and financial difficulties. Over the course of the past 3 years, rising interest rates have caused inflation to drive up the cost of everything from groceries to housing to transportation, making it more difficult for families to maintain their standard of living. Additionally, wages in certain industries have not kept pace with the rising costs, leaving many Americans with less purchasing power. As a result of the higher interest rates, the costs of loans are also higher, which makes it more challenging to expand operations, invest in new equipment, or hire additional workers. As a consequence, this causes a deceleration in the expansion of the economy, which in turn results in the reduction of wages and the loss of jobs. It is especially difficult for small businesses, which frequently rely on loans to cover their operating costs, to survive in this economic climate. A good number of these companies are being compelled to reduce the number of employees they employ, postpone their plans for expansion, or even completely cease operations. This has resulted in a decrease in the number of jobs that are currently available, as well as a decrease in the confidence that consumers have in the economy. As a consequence of this impact, even more direct mortgages have been created. The dream of home ownership in the United States is becoming even more difficult to realize as a result of rising costs. There are a lot of families that are having trouble keeping up with the rising costs because both car loans and credit card debt have become more expensive. Younger generations are unable to accomplish this. While rising interest rates make it nearly impossible to afford a home, rental prices are also on the rise, leaving millions of people with fewer options for affordable housing. In the meantime, the overall housing market is falling. Higher credit card interest rates are making it harder for households to manage debt, pushing many deeper into financial insecurity. And then there is the problem of corporate pricing power. Even as inflation slows, major corporations continue to raise prices, squeezing every last dollar from consumer shrinkflation, where companies reduce product sizes while keeping prices. The same has become common practice, further eroding consumer purchasing power. The result, a weaker middle class, declining economic uncertainty, is fueling anxiety among both businesses and consumers. And if these issues are not addressed soon, the consequences could be long-lasting. However, if there is one thing that history has shown, it is that economic power can shift. The United States must decide now whether to adapt and rebuild or continue down a path of isolation and decline. This means that the United States is facing not just one economic crisis, but multiple crises at the same time. Trade wars, labor shortages, inflation, and rising costs are all falling into place, creating a perfect storm that could define the future of the United States economy for years to come. The choices that are made in the present will have a significant influence on the economic landscape that will become apparent in the future. The question that needs to be answered is whether or not the leaders of the country will take action to restore economic stability, or whether or not the country will continue to sink deeper into greater financial difficulties. Considerations regarding the future of the economy of the United States.